Alright, the lowly anticipated fight between Nate Diaz and Jake Paul is finally behind us. And in a lot of ways, this fight went a lot better than I and many other people expected. I made a video about this before, and I was convinced we were probably going to see an older, slower, damaged Nate Diaz go in there and get knocked out clean. But that didn't happen at all. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The narrative going into this fight was that the best case scenario for Nate Diaz was to go in there, take it a little slow in the early rounds, probably have to take a lot of damage, but then once we get past the first 4 rounds, his cardio was going to prevail and he was going to be able to start accumulating damage and maybe even get a late stoppage. And early on in this fight, that looked to be exactly how it was going to go. When I scored this fight live, I had it 2 rounds to 2 rounds going into the 5th. And then, as we all know now, the 5th round was when Jake was able to land that huge left hook that dropped Nate Diaz. And for a second there, I thought the fight was over. I mean, Nate almost went flying outside of the ring. But after watching the replay, it looks like Nate did get hit hard, but he also kind of lost his balance there and was not as hurt or as concussed as it looked. But needless to say, that was a 10-8 round. There were a lot of rounds that I thought you could easily give to Jake Paul because of the work he did early on. But then the accumulated damage of Nate later in the round, landing some clean shots on the inside. And when you consider his forward pressure, a lot of these rounds are arguable. At the end of the fight, the scorecards got read. One judge had it 97-92. The other 2 judges had it 98-91. I think if you're fair and you watch this fight, you gotta give Nate more than just 2 rounds. That being said, I totally see how Jake Paul got his hand raised. And at the end of the day, I mean, we all know Jake was the one who was landing the more damaging shots. At the end of the fight, it definitely looked like Jake was the deserving winner. But if you're a Jake Paul fan, I do not see how you come out of this fight having any more confidence in his ability as a boxer. Compared to his last few showings, you do see some small improvements technically. You see him utilizing his lead hand a lot more, throwing a lot of left hooks, one of which was the big left hook that dropped Nate Diaz in the 5th round. Outside of that, Nate Diaz was able to crowd him and in a lot of exchanges outbox him on the inside. After a performance like this, I think it might be time for him to lay all the world champion aspirations aside. If the best he can do against Nate Diaz is a decently contested decision, I don't believe he's ever going to be able to beat a legitimate pro boxer, which makes his pool of future opponents very small. And it's because we all know the narrative. If he's going to go in there and fight a guy who is a retired MMA fighter in their pro debut, chances are the guy who's been boxing for years is going to win. And I think even he knows that. A performance like this was just not going to cut it. He himself predicted a 5th round knockout. We saw him turn up the pressure in the 5th round looking for the knockout, but he just couldn't get it. I think after this fight, we got to be over and done with the whole fighting a washed up MMA fighter gimmick. I don't see how anybody has any more interest in this anymore. And if he keeps up in the competition in terms of ex-UFC fighters, he's gonna get beat. We saw the jump up from Askren to Woodley. All of a sudden, the fight was a lot more close. He got taken to decision the first time, though he did get the knockout in the rematch. We saw the fight against Anderson Silva, which was, again, really close, up until Jake was able to get that knockdown. And then now here, the fight against Nate Diaz, again, a very tightly contested fight. If he wants to up the level of retired MMA fighter, chances are he's gonna get beat. And we've already seen if he goes to fight someone who actually has some credibility in the boxing world, like a Tommy Fury, he's also gonna get beat. It looks like Jake's answer to the diminishing interest is changing it up completely and going into MMA, which I think he has even less of a chance of winning. If he wants to go in there against the Nate Diaz, a guy who's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, chances are he's gonna get choked out. And I think Jake's starting to feel that pressure too. We saw the tidal wave of boos during his post-fight interview, and we actually saw him start to crack, though he did have a very witty comeback.
Boo if you're a virgin.
So what's next? My prediction, in a year from now, Jake will no longer be a boxer. As I said before, if he wants to continue up in the level of competition, he's just going to get beat. And if he wants to keep fighting guys who it's pretty obvious that he's going to be able to beat, no one's going to tune in. We already know he has an MMA deal with the PFL, and conveniently, the PFL actually doesn't have a middleweight division. I think he's probably gonna try to go up against Nate Diaz in an MMA match. And then after that, he's probably gonna start his path towards fighting for the vacant PFL middleweight championship against somebody who's handpicked. That way he can say that he did deliver on his promise to become a world champion. And as for Nate, I think there is a good chance that $10 million offer is legit. We might see Nate Diaz in the PFL fighting Jake Paul in the rematch. But if Nate Diaz does go through with this, there's a good chance he's going to completely burn the bridge between him and the UFC, and we might not get to see that trilogy fight between Nate and Conor. But at the end of the day, this actually was a pretty entertaining fight, and thankfully, Us MMA fans did not have to see Nate Diaz get carried out of there on a stretcher. Thanks for watching.